Season 5, Episode 41 of the Hotspur America podcast. Season is over. Champions League is behind us. We have a robust show to talk through. I've got Vass and Tim on with me. Apologies. We've had some technical difficulties and then some. We had a gigantic storm here in Dallas last week that knocked out power, about 400,000 people for days on end. And then once my power came back on, my Mac crashed. So we don't have any intro music or outro music, but we're going to have a great pod. Speaking of, you can find us on all the podcast apps, iTunes and Spotify. We'd be remiss to not spend a little bit of time on the Champions League final. And Vass, I know you were at the stadium with 60,000 other people. I'd love to sort of hear about your experience and, result aside, how the day was.
It was a great pre-match experience, Sam. We got into N17 quite early. The weather was good to us. The pubs were heaving. A lot of fans about. And the beer was flowing quite nicely, and everyone looking forward to the game in eager anticipation. Stadium doors opened at 6, and mate, there was a huge rush to get in. I think everybody wanted to be inside to soak up more atmosphere and more neck oil, which ran out quite quickly as it happened. And then 60,000 people inside. There were the 4 jumbo screens that are already part of the stadium, and they laid out a whole load of screens out on the pitch as well, which everybody could see. But that was great. Sadly, though, the first 30 seconds of the actual game kind of killed the night. It was just a bit of a surreal experience after that. I'm sure we'll talk about the game briefly, but that just kind of made it a bit of a flat environment to be in. I think I must have spent most of the game with head in hands because I couldn't really comprehend what I was watching in some ways. And whilst the crowd did try and lift or get some songs going, I was going to say lift the team there, but the team were a few thousand miles away. It was just weird, and the time and the game seemed to go really fast for me. I don't know about you guys, but the game seemed to be over in a flash. And it was a great day out, and then a sad night out by the end of it. But a weird experience all in all.
Yeah, it was surreal for everyone. I'll let Tim here sort of guide what it was like in the pub. But real quick, so how did that work? Like, was everybody in there season ticket holders, or how did you manage, or how did somebody how were they able to get in?
Okay, so first priority was given to season ticket holders to log in and buy their usual seat if they wanted them, and then once that period expired, if you wanted to sit in a different part of the ground, or if you wanted to go with a member. Like, for example, in my family, we got 3 season tickets and my wife's a member, so we all wanted to go together. So we had to wait for the second tranche of tickets to sit somewhere else in the ground. And we got tickets together. And then I think there was possibly a third window where it went on to general sale. So it kind of was staged. But yeah, sold out. I mean, £10 a ticket or whatever it was, plus the famous booking fee, but there you go. Everyone got in. Yeah.
If it just would have worked out, it was pretty crazy in Dallas. That was, I mean, what time, Timmy? What time did we? When was it? 11:30, was it?
So we opened doors 2.5 hours prior to kickoff. About 3 hours before kickoff, we had probably 100 people lined up outside the pub. 30 minutes after opening doors, we were at capacity. And it filled up quick, and the atmosphere, much like Vass was saying, was there before the game, and that handball kind of killed it. We tried to get it going throughout, but I think everyone was just sitting there waiting for an opportunity to celebrate, and unfortunately, it just didn't come for us. And at the end of it, it was, just left with tears and beers.
Well, shout out to the Irishmen because they were fantastic. I mean, it was a raucous crowd. Yeah, the vibe beforehand was amazing.
The Irishman and Kevin Carr over at Community Beer Company.
Oh yeah,
he was giving us beer raffles throughout the game, so that was helping us get through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those deals where I think a lot of people had it in their mind that, it wasn't going to be unreasonable to think that we were going to concede first. We've been in that situation so many times before, but to do it so quickly and on such a stage and in the manner that we did, it just kind of left everybody like, kind of WTF. But look, results aside, all the organization, Timmy, you did and Chairs did, and then the Irishman, and again, as you said with Kevin, it's pretty amazing because he had down at his community beer brewery, which is gigantic, it can fit like 500 people. It was packed to the rafters there, but he wasn't down there. He was up sitting next to you, and I asked him, I was like, "Why are you down there?" He goes, "Well, this is where my peoples are. This is where my peoples are." So kudos to him. Look, shit result. I mean, what can we say? I mean, an incredible journey that we had. We'll probably talk about a little bit of it here, but that's not the real purpose of this show. This show is the season's behind us, and it's time to reflect. The window has started. Transfer window officially started, I think, middle of May, and the international aspect of the window just opened last Monday. So we're about a week into the window. We haven't signed anybody. I don't know whether that comes as any major surprise.
A week into the window and just over 500 days since our last signing.
So it begs the question, questions about our general transfer market strategy. So, Tim, I'll start with you. What's different this year?
I think where we were last year. We made it to a Champions League final, and that's a huge draw for players coming in. Also, we've shown that there's stability. Now 4 years in a row in the Champions League. We have stability. We have the new stadium. We're not looking at what is the cost going to be? What is the financing going to be? Are we able to afford this? Are costs rising on construction materials with Brexit? What's going on with that? That was a lot of uncertainty last year, and that uncertainty is no longer there. We're not entering a season where instead of generating revenue, we're paying rent to Wembley. We're entering a season where we have our stadium and we have a new income source that we know is there. So I think that's a huge difference from a financial standpoint. But then, like I said, from a player draw standpoint, making it to the Champions League final is huge. And if you look at it, we sit here exactly where Liverpool sat last year. 4th place in the Premier League and lost in a Champions League final.
Well, I want to touch on that real quick, and I want to ask Vass. So what do you think the differences are, or are there any differences between the state that Liverpool was in this time last season versus where we find ourselves now?
No, there's not much difference, Sam, apart from the fact that Liverpool, I guess, having lost the Champions League final last season, it wasn't their first trip to the Champions League final. They'd been winners before, they'd actually been losers before. So for them, it was something, or for their club history, as it were, I don't think it was the same kind of impact. So we're in the same position, sort of league finish wise, and getting to the Champions League final, but from a historical standpoint, it didn't have the same impact for Liverpool because they were already, I suppose, established in Europe. They have an affinity with the Champions League and the European Cup as it was before, whereas for Spurs, this was a first, and I think it elevated us to a new level. So to Timmy's point, I think this is something that's changed for us for the better.
Hey, I'll tell you a difference. Fenway Sports Group and Enoch.
Well, okay. Well, talk about that. Talk about the differences of, so Fenway Group is really sort of a, private equity style investment firm. It's led by John Henry. And obviously, we all know who Enoch is. But how do you see the differences between those two?
Is they've showed a history and a willingness to spend, where right now our history is against that, and we're at a cross point in building the new project, phase 2 of the Pochettino project, where we really need to know, is it going to change or is it business as usual? And I guess that gets into... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to ask you, but were they in a more simpler spot? I mean, were they just kind of a couple of pieces away from having the team that they desired versus a more complex set of issues that we face?
No, I think they were just a couple pieces away. That's where I think we're at. and we'll get into later on what those pieces are. But we have a strong team. We really do. I really think we're just a couple pieces away.
So Rick Kelly from Facebook, I mean, it's a tongue-in-cheek question. You know, he asks, will there be any transfers? Can we all agree we're going to sign players this window, right?
There has to be. I don't know how you can go another window without it. And especially right now, the difference is last year we didn't have some of the contract situations that we do right now.
Right.
So I think there has to be with players entering the last year.
So I guess the big question is now, you know, what's the strategy going to be? Is it you know, business as usual, or is it, you know, time to make the change for the next phase of Pochettino's career at Spurs? Steve Oxton, probably the most well-traveled Spurs fan this year around the globe, asked, do we stick to the model? Do we buy young, make their stock rise, or spend money on older, more tried and tested players? Vash, you have any views on that?
There's an argument for bringing in experience. It served us well when we first started to compete for regular European places. When the Tottenham journey kind of evolved a little bit under Martin Jol and went forward, we brought in experienced players like Edgar Davids and Noureddin Naibet, etc. And then we brought in Van der Vaart, who'd been there and done that subsequently. So there's an argument to sort of go that way, but I don't see the model changing, and I don't see us going down the route of tried and tested players. I think we'll go for players that are relevant right now, but young players that are relevant right now. So I think Pochettino likes to have young, energetic, talented players. So that's what I think we will be going for in this window. And to answer Rick Cowley's point, yes, there will be signings. I'm fairly confident of that. Terence Mott
just fairly.
All right, I'm confident.
No,
Terence Mott on Facebook also asked, you know, a book is offering good odds on another window without any transfers in. How much money do you throw at that? I'm like saying, throw your money over here and I'll take that bet for you.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If that were to happen, we'd lose a manager as well, right?
Sure.
And let me piggyback on what Bass was saying. I kind of agree, you know, stick to the model, but in a different way. You buy the young players, but not the bargain young players. Some of these young players that are being rumored, 22 years old, Lo Celso and Ndombele, they're going to cost a lot of money. And that's where you differ from the model in the past. So spend more money, but on younger players that fit what Pochettino tries. Yeah,
that's what I meant by...
Well,
that's what I meant by saying by relevant players that are relevant now, and not talking about, say, a Max Aarons at Norwich or people of that ilk. That's not... Yeah, you can bring those in and let them evolve, but what you want is relevant quality young players, yes. And Ndombele, for example, who you just mentioned, will cost a bucket load of cash, but that's where our sights should be set now.
And so Ryan Hikes kind of asks, how much should we value depth compared to a new star? Should you pay big money for someone who could replace Eriksen if he does leave, or instead get 3 to 4 rotational players for depth, kind of like we did in the Gareth Bale situation? What do you think, Sammy? Depth, new star, how do you compare those two to each other? Are you there, Sam?
Sorry, I was rambling.
Sam's on mute.
You pressed the mute button? Of course you did.
I hit this mute button. I finally did.
I bet you were saying a bunch of good shit, weren't you?
Really was. So this is kind of the heart of our transfer strategy. Like, what we do and the angles and the approaches that we take really depends in great part on what we're going to do with Eriksen and what we're going to do with Toby. And I know we're going to spend a lot of time talking about both of those players and their respective situations. But, you know, I'm kind of, if I heard both of you correctly, there's going to be a balance here. I mean, we're going to have young players to develop. I think that's at the heart of what Pochettino does. But you've got to have sort of key tenured experience, guys that you